Hello, everybody. It's Stuart Watson here, and I'm joined by my partner in crime, Andy Warren. Just the two of us today to have a little look ahead to Ipswich Town's trip to Fleetwood. We're going back to Lancashire, my friend. Are you looking forward to it?
Yeah, that's all I've got to say about that. Yeah, what's not to like? 2 weekends in a row in Lancashire in a Honda Jazz. That's probably 20 hours of driving with you in a Honda Jazz in 8 days to Lancashire. What's not to like? I've had a little break in the middle. Morecambe, Milan, Fleetwood. That's my sandwich of a week. Pretty glamorous.
Culture. What was just a few little days in Milan, was it?
Yeah, 2 nights. Very, very nice city. Similar to Morecambe in many ways. But yeah, lovely. Thank you. I went to San Siro on Tuesday, which is very different from Morecambe and Fleetwood, isn't it?
For a game or a stadium tour?
For a game. For a game on Tuesday, which was pretty cool. I guess lots of our listeners will have been 20 years ago when Ipswich played at Inter, but being the son of a teacher, my mum was letting me out to go to Milan on a Thursday during term time.
How old were you then?
Ooh, I would have been 2000. Let me do some math. Leave it with me. I'll be back.
A high school child.
It was 21 years ago. I'd been like 14.
Okay.
So yeah.
Who played on Tuesday?
The Milan derby.
That was the derby.
Yeah, but that wasn't meant to be on. It kind of got rescheduled after we'd booked the trip. So a pleasant surprise for Mrs. Warren, who probably enjoyed it more than me.
I'm amazed that you managed to swing. Did she go with you, your wife?
Yeah, she loved it.
Wow. I would not have been swinging that one. And that's the game that's kind of an itch scratched, isn't it? Because you was due to go to that game a few years ago that finished an epic 3-3 and Ibra and Lukaku scored and your flight had got cancelled, hadn't it? So
yeah,
does that feel like a bit of redemption for you there to finally see that game?
Yeah, redemption song. This was basically the Ipswich v Cheltenham, by the way. It finished 0-0. Milan had loads of chances and couldn't take them. It was the first leg of the cup set, the semi-final of the Coppa Italia. So considering going to the second leg now in April, we'll see. Good fun though.
Well, first you've got to go back to Lancashire with me.
That's what I want to do.
The big question is, will there be, talking of revenge and redemption, will there be a rematch on the coast up in the northwest? Listeners to the first pod of the week will know that I may have beaten a former not a world champion, but a world-ranked crazy golf player at his own sport last weekend. For anyone who wants some proof, I managed to find this in my bag this morning. That just gives you a little idea for those watching on video. Adventure Golf scorecard at Happy Mount Park. It says it's pirate themed. There wasn't a lot of pirate themage going on, was there?
There was a bridge. There was like a wooden bridge. That's about all you were getting. I'll be honest, mate. I've not listened to Monday's podcast. I'm not sure how this was addressed, but if you're expecting me to come on here and say the course was covered in bird poo and that didn't help me, or covered in feathers or leaf damage, I'm not going to do that. I was beaten by a better man. A man, if I'm completely honest, mate, I think you and me should head to Hastings for the next World Championships, because you're a putter.
Yeah,
you're a putter, my friend. I think you could do some damage at the Worlds.
I think there was one moment where you looked when I just rolled one in, cool as you like, and you said, "Yeah, I can see the golfer in you there."
Golfer. I'm terrible at real golf. Absolutely useless.
The turning point, just looking at this scorecard, was the 7th, when I think I went 3 up, and I think one of your putts did hit some sort of twig and was diverted away from the hole, and that was the turning point. But maybe I'll let you have a shot at revenge if we can find a spare hour or two this weekend. Yes, let's talk about football in Ipswich Town, shall we? Because that's what we're here for, of course. We've kind of addressed the Morecambe game in your absence, Andy, earlier in the week. We don't need to go through that. It was Cheltenham again. It was domination. It was chances not taken. It was another highly frustrating draw. And it's compounded a little bit by results in midweek with Sheffield Wednesday, Portsmouth and Wycombe all winning, which means the gap, which could have been sort of down to 1 point last weekend, would have been at 2 points now, is now 6. It's a 6 points gap with Ipswich in 9th and some games in hand around Ipswich. Portsmouth, 1 place back in 10th, have got 2 games in hand. Plymouth, 1 place ahead in 8th, have also got 2 games in hand. So what that means, according to the supercomputer at sportsclubstats.com, is that Ipswich now have a 4% chance of making the top 6. You taking those odds? How are you feeling about it?
I think it's just spelling out that we've been talking about the size of the task at hand for many, many weeks on here, haven't we? I think that, in combination with the games in hand that teams have played that you've just mentioned there, is just kind of making that task that bit more simple on paper. And I don't mean simple as in an ability to actually complete the task, but like it's simplified the route and spelt out just how hard it's going to be. I don't know, is that supercomputer, is this one of the kind of let's generate results a million times and see how many times?
I think there's an element of that, but also I think there's a bit of it's sort of weighted towards sort of how the games have gone in the reverse fixtures and whether teams are at home. I think there's a bit of that sort of put in as well, but ultimately it's just kind of results simulated millions of times and the most likely outcome. So I'll tell you something, Andy. I wrote after the game at the weekend that it wasn't quite mission impossible, but it was mission highly unlikely. And I think we all came away from last week feeling sort of really deflated and that it was slipping away. But over time, I've kind of convinced myself it's still on. I don't know if it's whether it's listening to the confidence of Sam Morsey and Wes Burns, who's the latest to kind of say, do you know what? No, we still believe in this. And I don't know whether it's the nature of the performances that Ipswich have been so dominant under Kieran McKenna, but I've started to look at the stats and thought there's still a chance here, because 2 points per game is what Ipswich Town have averaged since Kieran McKenna took charge over a 12-game stretch. So that's not exactly a small sample size. And I say all in inverted commas as if it's nothing, all they need to do is replicate that again over the final 11. And that takes them to 75, the magic 75-point marker, which I think once in the last 20 odd years hasn't been enough to get you in the top 6. And it might take a little bit more this year to get in the top 6. But 2 points a game over the final 11, that works out at 6 wins, 4 draws, 1 defeat, or 7 wins, 1 draw, 3 defeats. Go through those final 11 games, and I think you can find 7 wins in there, can't you?
Yeah. We're saying 4%, the supercomputer's saying, right? I would give them more than a 4% chance because I don't think that supercomputer is taking into account those 12 Kieran McKenna games that you've just said. We've seen them, like you say, we've seen them do it. I think there are tougher games ahead than perhaps have gone before in many ways, but we've seen them do it over 12 games. I think it's going to be very, very difficult to do it from here. But the recent Kieran McKenna past makes I would give them a more than a 4% chance. And you know what? This all just makes me so much more frustrated with what we saw over the last 2 games. Because if you add 4 points onto their tally that they've got now, which I think by consensus we would probably all agree that performances, if not finishing, deserved, that would look so different, wouldn't it? If they'd got, I wonder what that percentage would come out as.
Yeah, I think it would make them the form side out of those sort of sides vying for the top 6. As it is, I think they're about 3rd or 4th in there. Obviously, Sheffield Wednesday are growing great guns at the moment. Bolton have had some really good form of late. Portsmouth starting to hit the straps as well. I'll go through those 11 games, and I think listeners can maybe play along at home and kind of peg these down as wins, draws, or defeats, and we'll feed that into the supercomputer and kind of see where that sort of leaves us. Fleetwood away at the weekend. If we're talking about sort of must wins now and needing to get 7-8 wins, we've got to have this one down as a win, haven't we?
Yeah, I don't necessarily feel like that going into it. But I think if they're going to reach their target, yes, considering what's ahead, this has to be one of eight wins, if that's how many we're saying they need. Fleetwood away, who they're not. Where are they in the table at the moment? 19th, and haven't won in some time. You got to be clocking up. You got to be clocking up a win there.
Yeah, I mean they're a strange team. Fleetwood. We'll come on to them probably towards the end of this, but they've had a couple of 3-3 draws recently against Plymouth and Portsmouth. So make of that what you will. They were 3-0 up at Portsmouth last weekend and ended up drawing that game, but by all accounts were roundly beaten by Wigan. 2-0 could have been more in midweek. But if we're putting our optimistic hats on at the moment and we're saying Ipswich are playing some really good football under McKenna, everything but the goals in the last couple of games, and we're thinking, the wins will come. We've got to put Fleetwood down as one of those first wins. So we're off. We've got our first win down. Lincoln at home to come next Tuesday night. Pack out Portman Road, big crowd. Lincoln are sinking like a stone at the moment. Appleton's coming under a bit of pressure. That's got to be another W, hasn't it?
Tick.
Then we come on to Portsmouth at home, who we've already mentioned that have just beaten Oxford. Big result for them. I think they're up there in terms of form over the last sort of 5 or 6 games. This is where it gets a bit more tricky. The home form has been good for Ipswich. That's I know it was the draw against Cheltenham last time out, but they've only lost 2 games in the league at home all season, and that was the Bolton 5-2 early doors when players hadn't still arrived and still gelling, etc. And Rotherham, who were top of the table and are the best team in the division. So Portsmouth at home, what are you going to give me for that?
I think they've got to win it. If I'm honest, that has to be one of the wins. Portsmouth, what are they? 2 points back with 2 games in hand. Got to win it. Draws are no good. Do you want optimistic hat? It's got to be the win. It's got to be one of them. I think it has to be one of them.
I've got draw/win.
Yeah, that's
written
what I've
down
got
there,
down,
which we can revisit. Oxford away.
Got to win it, Stu.
Got to win that one as well.
If otherwise Oxford are gone, in my opinion, from Ipswich's grasp, and they need some low hanging fruit here. They can't just be playing all in for sixth place.
I've actually got this one down as one that could potentially be lost. If we're talking about you can lose 2, possibly 3 maximum, that's got to go down, and we'll come on to Rotherham away in a bit. I think that's one that could be down as an L. And Oxford, I think, might get away. They might end up finishing 4th comfortably and away from home. If we're going to have to chalk down 1 or 2 defeats in here, that's one that I've possibly got down as a defeat. And they can get away with, it's not can't afford to lose any games. They could probably get away with losing 1 or 2 and still reaching that 75 points.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean. They need to beat the teams around them, and that's where we come on to Plymouth at home. At the end of those 3 games against 3 teams that they're vying with, I think you can mitigate a loss against Oxford by them beating Plymouth at home. That if you can beat Portsmouth and Plymouth at home, either side of Oxford, 6 points from those 3 games would do nicely. I think. What do you reckon?
I'm writing down my actual thoughts on these games as we go. Do you want them now, or do you want to tally it? Do you want to tally it at the end?
Yeah, all right. Keep them quiet, and we'll do it at the end.
But I've got this. They have to win that game. They've got to win their home games. So Plymouth has to be a win.
Okay, so we're through what I've labelled make or break March. after a frustrating February. That end of March looks like, I think we'll know by the end of this month what direction of travel we're in. April, Cambridge at home.
Got to be a win.
Yeah. Shrewsbury away.
Got to be a win.
Yeah. And then we get on to Easter. And Easter against the division's top two sides, the teams that look like, for my money, will go on to secure the automatic promotion spots. Rotherham away on Good Friday, followed by Wigan at home on Easter Monday.
I fear that for Rotherham, that might be wrapping up promotion territory at home. I think I've got that one down as an L in that one.
Yeah. It could go one or two ways. Rotherham could either have kind of wrapped it up by then, and how many times do you see teams do that and naturally lose a bit of that edge, take their foot off the gas as much as you convince yourself you're not going to? It becomes a bit of a party, and Ipswich could go and poop that party. But conversely, they might just enjoy themselves, and they're a good team. They're a very good team, Rotherham, for a reason. So if we're talking about maybe getting away with a couple of defeats, I think you're right. That one probably looks the most likely. Wigan at home, similar conversation. One game on. Where are Wigan at that moment in time? Will Keane on fire for them at the moment. We never got to see Paul Cook take on his former team.
No.
Wigan at home at Portman Road. That one is they drew at Wigan fairly recently with John McGrill there. I've got draw/win next to that.
I've got the same. If they've managed to play themselves into, we're obviously talking about this now with a theoretical hat on. By this point, as you say, make or break March will be done. If they're really in the mix by this point, that could be some crowd at that game, couldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
If they're seriously in this mix, Wigan coming to town on a bank holiday. Is that the bank holiday Monday game?
That's the Easter Monday, yeah.
Yeah, that could be a real occasion. We've seen big crowds for very run of the mill games, obviously the pack out Portman Road ones, but as well on top of that. But that could be some game. That would remind me of, this is probably winding back to 2003 or something. They played Nottingham Forest at home. At this kind of stage of the season, another promotion contender, David Johnson, playing up front for Nottingham Forest. And the crowd was nearly full. It was nearly full at Portman Road that day, 29,000. The atmosphere was brilliant. So if they've seriously played themselves into the mix by this point, I'd be really looking forward to that. Hopefully they deliver.
Which leaves us with 2 to go. Crewe away, who could be scrapping for their lives still as we hit the penultimate game. I'll leave you to silently make your prediction there.
It's got to be a win, mate.
Well, we've got to, haven't we? If we're putting out, if we're trying to search for these 7-8 wins, and then finish with Charlton at home.
Yeah,
Scott Fraser returning.
Scott Fraser's
Road on the final day.
Yeah, yet to play himself really into the Charlton starting lineup. I note, but I think given where Ipswich are now, I think it's going to need a final day win, isn't it? To get in. So that could be a big crowd as well. That could be brilliant.
That could be a big crowd. So home, I think Portman Road advantage could be crucial throughout this. I think certainly winning the next couple of games to kickstart some or renew some momentum is going to be big. Just before you give me your predictions, I looked at the results from the reverse fixtures in those 11 games. It was 5 wins, 3 draws, 3 defeats, which is 18 points. So that needs to be bumped up to 22 to get that 2-game average. So you just need to improve what you've done by 4. So you've got to turn a defeat into a win. You've got to, a defeat into a draw. However you want to sort of upgrade that, turn a couple of draws into wins. That doesn't sound as
No.
daunting on paper when you
No.
put it like that, does it?
No, especially when you think that they've already drawn with Oxford, lost at Plymouth, drew with Cambridge. You could improve that points by you could pick up 2 on that in that sense by beating Cambridge.
Yeah,
at home.
The Charlton game was obviously a defeat, so you'd like to think that's one that could be turned on its head. On the flip side of that, they won at Portsmouth, didn't they? So sort of repeating that is obviously a difficult ask, but it is a game at Portman Road. Go on then. What have you got? What have you got down for me? And I'll feed it into the supercomputer.
I've got 22 points. That's that's exactly how it's come out. As it.
So how many wins?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wins.
Yeah.
Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wins, 4 draws and a loss.
Yeah, which takes us to the magic 75-point marker. What have I got? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 7 wins, Andy, and I've got 1, 2 draws. So that leaves 2 defeats, doesn't it? Yeah, 7 wins, 2 draws, 2 defeats, which is I've got 23 points. Is that right? 23 points. So, as I say, I've convinced myself. I don't know if we were convincing everybody listening, but
I don't know. I don't know if I want the overarching kind of takeaway from this podcast being that Andy and Stu definitely think Ipswich are going to make the playoffs because I
don't know if I do, but it's just it's the hope in football, isn't it? And if you don't have the hope, then what's the point? I just feel like, obviously, look, the missing ingredient, and we'll come on to this, is a goal scorer in form. And I think if they can get someone shoulders back, confidence high, that feels like they're going to score every game, and that might just take one match. That might just take someone to go up to Fleetwood and score a brace and spark something. And you never know, because the rest of it's there, isn't it? In terms of the performances, clean sheets galore. Don't feel like they're scoring, dominating games. They are creating chances as well. Yeah. You know, it's not as if we're talking about not scoring and not creating. The chances are there. They're just not taking them.
Yeah, that was Paul Lambert at times, wasn't it? No, not scoring, but you didn't know where a goal was going to come from. They could have scored 8-9 goals over the course of the last 2 games and come away with 6 points, but they've scored 1 and come away with 4. On my little sheet here that I've gone through your games, starts with a draw. I think a draw at Fleetwood on my little list. So I need to remind myself of that when sitting there after, if it ends in a 1-1 draw at Fleetwood. Just remind myself that it's not a disaster. There's still another 21 points to come in the next 10 games on paper.
Interesting. I think for me, 3 draws in a row against Cheltenham, Morecambe and Fleetwood would be very difficult to kind of mentally recover from. They can just about shake off 2 of those sort of deflating blows. I think a third might derail things a little bit. But as you say, it just highlights what's to come and how many points there would still be to play for. I had a little look at the run-ins of various other teams. Plymouth have got a ridiculous run-in. I'll just find Plymouth's run-in here because it's worth mentioning.
Ridiculously tough.
One of the two, ridiculously tough on paper. You could argue that it gives them a chance to take points off of others as well, of course. But Plymouth's run-in, after coming to Portman Road towards the end of March, they then play Oxford, Burton, Wycombe, Sunderland, Wigan, NK Dons is their finish to the season. And there's plenty of these teams to sort of play each other towards the top end of the table. So teams will take points off of each other as well. Yep.
Well, I think we're getting to the point of really we've started it already, really, haven't we? But very much kind of watching other teams. I'm glad these games in hand are starting to be played out a little bit. I could, for my own brain, I could do with the table just being a bit more even rather than lopsided. But there's still a long way to go. I still think it's going to be incredibly tough for them to do it from here. But I think we're saying there's a chance.
Yes, and if we've been wearing our optimistic hat throughout this chat, I guess if you was putting your pessimistic one on, you'd say they haven't beaten enough of the teams above or around them. Since McKenna's come in, the defeats have come against Sheffield Wednesday and Bolton. They drew at MK Dons. I think it will take a win during that end of March period to really get people believing. And maybe if that comes against Portsmouth in front of a big crowd at Portman Road, that could be the thing that really ignites it. But couple of games to get through first. And Fleetwood, as Mick McCarthy would say, are no mugs. They might be only sort of 2 points above the drop zone, but I've mentioned a couple of their 3-3 draws against the likes of Plymouth and Portsmouth recently, and some familiar faces in that Fleetwood squad.
Yeah.
Whether they play or not remains to be seen. Toto Nsiala, obviously the most recently departed Blue in their camp. He was on the bench on Tuesday night against Wigan, so
yeah,
we'll see if he starts at the weekend. Well,
I'm looking forward to seeing him again, Stu. I'll be honest. This is like the moment that he left. I sort of looked to the game. I don't know why he's dropped to the bench. I can't say I've followed his fortunes massively closely, other than kind of in the very early games where he was involved in a couple of goals, couple of assists. But I guess when they've been conceding goals, they might question their backline. But they did lose the other night. Maybe they make a change again. Who knows? But Ellis Harrison is a player I always enjoy watching. I quite liked watching him play for Ipswich. If I'm honest, he had a little something about him that I wanted to see more of, and it never seemed to click, especially under Paul Lambert. It just wasn't a Paul Lambert kind of player. I'm not sure he was the kind of character that Paul and his staff wanted around, but he's a player that I've enjoyed watching when he's played against Ipswich, and I think he enjoys maybe proving a little bit of a point at times. He's that kind of guy. Similar traits to Joe Garner, who's also at Fleetwood, but not going to see him because he got himself in a little fight in stoppage time of that game at Wigan on Tuesday.
A proper wrestle, wasn't it, at the end of the game with James McLean, a bit of an aerial collision. They both end up on the deck, and then there's headlocks and players running in, and they roll around on the floor for a little while, and off they both go. I think Garner was probably the bigger aggressor looking back at that. He thrust his head in towards James McLean, and the pair of them had words as they left the pitch. So no Joe Garner, but Ellis Harrison, as you say, I think it was as much. He's a big personality, and I think that went against him ultimately in the end, as much as his on-field journey at Ipswich Town. We always felt that he was a bit of a jack of all trades striker, someone that can do a bit of everything. He's reasonably quick. He's strong in the air. But it wasn't to be. He was one of the Paul Hurst signings that kind of drifted away sooner than the others. But it looks like he'll be leading the line. You asked about Toto Nsiala. He'd started 4 games in a row before dropping out at the weekend. So there's every chance he comes back in. Now the big question is, Andy, if Toto Nsiala's playing, or indeed if he isn't, which strikers does Mr. McKenna go with? It's a debate we're having every game at the moment around Ipswich Town. The rotation continues. It started really because I think McKenna was wanting to keep everybody involved, keep everybody happy and sharp, and was kind of picking players based on their attributes for what was right for each opposition. We're almost getting to the stage where it's the rotations happening just as much because no one's really grasping their chance. I think if someone was coming in and scoring goals every game, then they'd make themselves impossible to drop. But no one's done that, have they?
No, not yet. No. Obviously, Macaulay Bond's the latest kind of one in focus, isn't he, for chances missed at Morecambe a week ago. If I'm picking a team, it would be different. I would pick a different player. If I was picking someone to play against Toto Nsiala, it wouldn't be the same player that I would pick to play for Ipswich in this game. If I really wanted to target Toto, I'd pick James Norwood to target Toto. I think he could get under Toto's skin for a long time, and then if he lasts an hour, then you've got Kaden Jackson's pace off the bench to then frustrate him further. But obviously, we're not going to be. I don't think Kieran McKenna is going to pick a team especially to target Toto and Nsiala, given that we don't know whether he's even going to play or not. But I have some thoughts on who I would play. What about
Give
you?
them to me.
You want them?
Yeah.
I think I'm at the point where I would quite like to remove the Bash brothers from the equation, particularly if it means one of them playing wider. I'm not sure that works. I would, if it was me, I would be at a point where I'd be consistently having Bersant Selina on the pitch from the start of games at the moment, I think, and I'd pair him with Chaplin. I think I'd stick with that, and then it's a bit tougher at the top end. My heart keeps telling me that Macaulay Bonne is the one to stick with there, and like I said the last time we spoke about this, I don't know if that's me being too sentimental or harking back too far, but the old cliche of he's getting in the right areas, he's having the chances. I think I'd go Bonne, Selina, Chaplin. I think. Why are you smiling?
I'm smiling because we're so often very, very close on these things without sort of pre-discussing it. I've gone for Selina and Chaplin back as the dual number 10s. And maybe with Chaplin, you could adapt that Selina almost becomes the more floaty number 10 and push Chaplin further forward almost to play in a front two. He's played as a striker before. That'd be interesting to maybe get him in the box that little bit more. He's on 9 goals now, Chaplin. He's shown what a good finisher he is. And I just think I've gone slightly different, and I wrestled with that same thing because part of me thinks Macaulay Bonne has shown so much love to Ipswich Town and the fans, and is now the time to sort of repay that love and faith to him and stick by him during his sort of time of need, and he just needs that one goal to spark him, and part of me thinks that, but my head says that James Norwood, out of those 4 strikers, I just think James Norwood is their best striker. I honestly do. I think, and I know he's not scored as many goals of late, but he's been playing this sort of hybrid left-sided forward role, and I looked at his touch map from the game at Morecambe last weekend, and he'd only had about 2, 3, 4 touches in the opposition box. And James Norwood is at his best when he's in the box. And for that reason, I'd be playing him as the central striker, and you stay in the box and you stay between the width of that 18-yard box. And I think he'd be the one that, as I said before, if I really had to be putting big wagers on who's going to take chances. Yes, he missed one in the first half last weekend. I'd still go with James Norwood. Just look at his goal record over a prolonged period of time. So I'm in agreement with you about Selina. We couldn't believe the fact that he'd come to League One level last summer. The thought that he's part of a sort of a rotation would have been unthinkable going back a few months. And he looked lively when he came on against Morecambe last weekend, didn't he? And yes, I know Morecambe had something to protect, and they were dropping deeper, and there were spaces for him to operate in. But he's the one that can create something out of nothing. And Chaplin, as I say, has scored some goals. So that those are the reasons that I'd be going with those 3. But it's impossible to predict what Kieran McKenna's going to go with, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Chaplin and Selina that I feel passionately about in this. The Bonne or whoever else in that forward position. No, I'm not sold, but I think from watching a couple of slightly different versions of Kieran McKenna's teams, I think I want to see those 2 in whatever configure. I know what you're saying about Chaplin playing a bit higher up the pitch as well. He's clearly capable of it, but in terms of just personnel on the field, I think it's time to see those 2 play some games in succession. Norwood, I would agree with you in terms of the finishing and sort of a gun to your head, who's going to take this chance for you. I'd agree with that, with being James Norwood. I just wonder, in a side that's so kind of possession focused, whether it needs a little bit more control from its central striker than James offers at the start of games. But then again, I can convince myself otherwise, because maybe the control needs to come from Selena and Chaplin. They give you that control, and then the chaos merchant in the box is James Norwood.
I get where you're coming from with that, but I'm not sure Macaulay Bron's bringing you that. If I can dispassionately say Macaulay Bon, 1 goal in 20, but he's bringing a lot to the team, and forget about the goals, it's everything else he brings. I'm not convinced he's bringing. Forget the goals. I'm not convinced he's playing as well. Take the goals away from it as well as he was earlier in the season. I'm not sure he's affecting centre backs in the way he was before. He just looks like someone low on confidence, highly frustrated, and this is where you get into the debate. Do you give him chance to get out of that, or do you just go with who you think's gonna do it? So fascinating to see who he starts up front. There are other areas of the team to discuss, but before we get on to that, we probably have to discuss what would be a wild card option up front, which would be the young man Tyrese Simpson, who scored twice for Kieran Dyer's under-23s. They beat Swansea 4-1 on Monday afternoon. 3 goals for the 23s since his recall from Swindon. We know he got 11 goals for them at League 2 level. When he first came back, we kind of said, I think his best chance really was going to be once the season was done and maybe the playoffs had gone, and start experimenting for next year. But the lack of goals from the strikers, coupled with him scoring for the 23s, do you think that sort of pushes him, sort of speeds up his route towards the first team in these final 11 games?
I could make an argument for you for that to be the case. I could also make an argument for it not to be the case. But if you're going to argue for Tyrese Simpson, what are you saying? You're saying he's a man that hit double figures in League 2 in the first half of the season, has come back and has been scoring goals in the only games he's got the ability to score goals in at the moment, which is the under-23s. Depending on where he's at in terms of like confidence and things regarding the contract situation, which we've talked about enough on here, but you could argue that he's their most confident striker, couldn't you? He's got the fearless youth. I think Tyrese Simpson strikes me as, I think he's got some sort of technical things that need clearing up in his game for absolute sure. But he strikes me as the kind of striker that's always going to have a certain baseline level of confidence because of the physicality that he's got as kind of fall on as a base. So if you're arguing for him to come into the side, that's the argument. I cannot claim to have seen enough of him play for Swindon to know whether he's improved technically enough to be as good as the players that are currently in amongst it, though. So
stylistically, who is he closest to out of those 4? If you're talking about him taking one of those players' place in the squad, Kaden Jackson, in terms of being a sort of athletic, quick. He's probably a bit more physically powerful.
He's maybe a hybrid of Norwood and Jackson. Maybe he's got traits of Bon in terms of a bit more power as well. But Jackson's the closest, probably. I
would say so. And then you'd probably be saying then, if you're saying, right, okay, he's in the squad, so one of those has to drop out. And then I would argue that Kaden Jackson is actually probably their most in form. And I use that in the loosest term. He's had one very good game against Burton, did pretty well at MK Dons, but he looks their most sort of confident player at the moment. So to sort of take him out for Simpson to come in, I can't make an argument for him to start at the moment, but I could certainly say that if there's another game at Fleetwood at the weekend where Ipswich are frustrated, it's a draw going into the final stages, who is more likely to make an impact off the bench for you? Tyrese Simpson is going to be chomping at the bit
Yes,
if
he
you bring
is.
him on for the last 10, 15, 20 minutes. He's got a real point to prove. There's this contract situation rumbling on in the background. He's going to be someone who comes on and really wants it. And they should all really want it. Joe Pigott should be coming onto the field to really want to sort of take his chance as well. But I just sometimes feel that fearlessness of youth, that sort of wild card option can sometimes pay you dividends when other things aren't working. I don't think he'll be on the bench this weekend, but it's certainly an interesting debate.
Yeah, it is, and at the same time, we've had this discussion. I don't know. We've been talking for 10 minutes or so about Ipswich Town strikers, and we've barely discussed Joe Pigott, have we? Barely discussed him, and I don't think, having seen enough of Joe, I don't think he's necessarily a bench option. I don't know what you're bringing him off the bench for, unless you're suddenly going to go route one. But I don't think Kieran McKenna is a route one football manager. So in terms of a substitute, I don't know what Joe Pigott would be.
The thing that complicates me for Pigott is that he's a link player. He's a back to goal. I think people have almost sort of typecast him as a sort of more of a long ball man because he played in that Wimbledon side that went long, and he had Ollie Palmer alongside him that was more of the target man. But I think he's he's closer to a number 10. He's a back to goal player that drops into those pockets. And if we're talking about Selina and Chaplin playing in those sort of areas of the pitch, then you've got too many people trying to sort of trip over each other, really. So it's hard to see kind of where he fits into the various systems. He's not someone that can play that hybrid wide forward role. No. I don't think his attributes are capable of doing that, which Norwood can do, Jackson can do, Bond could do. And there's other sort of proper number 10s that are sort of occupying that position as well. So a bit like Fraser earlier in the season, where does he fit in? And that's that's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been a tough old road for Joe Pigott at Ipswich, and I would have loved him to have taken his chance in one of those games that he played recently. He's had a couple of bashes at it recently, but for me, as much as kind of I can see what people say about him being a link player, and he has got a good touch. He can play with his back to goal, and he does look to kind of pop the ball off nicely and kind of then spin away and get. That's not enough. That's not enough for me. Your striker needs to be a goal threat, and I think we've said this before. I've said this before. I think he is a significantly better striker and football player than Ollie Hawkins was. I really do. Significantly better. But I find myself thinking the same things about Joe Pigott as I did about Ollie Hawkins, that he's got these nice touches here and there and you're looking for the positives. But ultimately, he didn't really fit into what Ipswich were doing either. So it's tough. I think if Simpson was to be involved, I think, or certainly numerically, I think the one that you would think might drop away from it would be Pigott, but I'm not convinced McKenna's going to do that. I'm not convinced that Simpson is going to break in ahead of any of those four. But I think you're bang on. He comes off the bench. If you want someone to come off the bench fueled and ready to go, then he's your man, because he will be so up for this if he could get the opportunity.
What muddies the water even more is that you can't. Sometimes when you're really on the fence with some of these decisions, what could sway you one way is to go, this guy's going to be here next season, the other guy's not. We'll go with, if we're going to put some experience into somebody, it's the one that's here for the longer term. But none of these strikers could you hang your hat on being here next season. Bond's loan expires, Norwood's contract expires, Jackson's contract expires, Simpson's contract is still very much up in the air, and Pigott, despite the fact that he is under contract, you start to wonder if that's a kind of a Scott Fraser not working out for all parties, it's best to move on. Although it's slightly complicated because you've got to find someone that's willing to kind of match the wages that Ipswich would have been paid for him there. But there is no right. You're someone that we're going to at least be here next season, and we want to build around. So, yes, we will look on with interest when that team sheet comes out at 2 p.m. Couple of other positions. Normally, this is where we say, right, the rest of the team sort of nailed on. But I would argue there's a couple of positions under debate this weekend. I don't know how you feel. Tyreek Backinson in midfield. We've had a bit of Carroll. We've had a bit of Backinson. We've had a bit of El Mazzuni and when Evans or Morsey haven't been available. Again, like the strikers, I don't think any of those three have really said, I'm undroppable. That's me.
No.
And I felt the same about Backinson last weekend.
Yeah, I thought he was all right of the week. I'd go with him again, if I'm honest. He's not made himself undroppable, though. He's not. When Kieran McKenna and Martin Pert are discussing the team on their whiteboard in their office over the next couple of days before this game, they will absolutely be having this conversation, I'm sure. But I'd go with him again. Yeah. For this one, I think we had this chat in quite a bit of depth before the Morecambe game, and these two away games felt like games for him potentially. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Carroll maybe for the Lincoln game at home, when you'd think a bit more. Obviously, we know Ipswich have a lot of possession, and they did manage to do it on that poor pitch at Morecambe a week ago. But I think Carroll needs to be playing in games where the possession is guaranteed, and the possession is guaranteed in good areas of the pitch. So the only conversation I'd be having really is if it's going to be Backinson or El Mazzuni for this one, and I think Backinson would get the nod from me.
Yeah, well, El Mazzuni played for the 23s on Monday. Whether that's with this weekend in mind, I'm not sure. I don't think the pitch was awful up at Morecambe last weekend. From the footage I've seen, the playing surface at Highbury isn't loads better, and maybe Backinson was kind of preferred. Yes, he's got a bit more height, although I wouldn't describe him as a physical player. But I would say his range of passing is more sort of aerial passing, whereas Tom Carroll's more of a ground passer. Maybe that sort of tipped the nod in his favour last weekend. I mean, he played some sumptuous first-time clipped crosses from deep. They weren't sort of crosses from wide, but, clipped balls towards the back post in the box, which created the chance for Norwood and others as well. But he just looks to me like the sort of player that gets a bit, as Ipswich dominated possession, he got a little bit casual and he just gave a little sort of 5-10 yard simple passes away. So I'm with you. I think ultimately I'm not completely sold on Backinson thus far, but I think he did enough right last weekend to get the chance to go again. One more player for me that's in the amber zone, as I've described it before, and that would be Dominick Thompson, the other of the January loan signings at left back. He's grown on me as the games have gone by. He's a very sharp passer. He plays some nice little sharp 1-2s. I think he had more touches of the ball than any other player on the pitch last weekend at Morecambe. But boy, does he tire in the second half. Stamina is an issue there. A couple of games in a row, it's like someone's pulled the plug on him. And he's not in the same mould as Wes Burns, is he, in terms of a dynamic, forward-thinking player? Do they need to go with a more dynamic option? They've got one in Kane Vincent-Young, another one who played for the 23s on Monday. Do we read anything into that?
You're right that they've got a winger playing at right wing back on the right side, and they've got a left back playing at left wing back on the left, haven't they? I'd still throw Matt Penny into this discussion. He doesn't seem near the discussion at the moment. It surprised us both, didn't it? I remember we were talking at Morecambe where we looked down that substitutes list and didn't see. I don't think Kane made the bench, did he? At Morecambe, there was no wing back option available, which I think had there been, there would have been a point where you considered using it for the reasons you've just said about Thompson and tiring. I'd still be He's far from perfect, but I'd still be considering Penny at this point. I think he's the closest thing you've maybe got to a sort of a Burns balance on that left side. I don't think it's a position they've necessarily got bang on in the windows so far, but I'd be considering one of those two, Penny or Vincent Young for this game. I would absolutely be having one of them on the bench.
Yeah, different player to Kane Vincent Young. Kane Vincent Young is going to give you a bit more pace, someone who can beat a man, step overs. I think his natural instinct would be to sort of come inside from the left. You could argue that actually just getting crosses into the box, especially on those games where you're struggling to break a team down, is what's required. And Matt Penny is the best crosser of those two options at left back. Look, I'm not going to rewrite history and say that Matt Penny is suddenly an amazing option, because there's a reason heading into January that we were talking about Penny's just a backup option and they need to upgrade in that position. But I think he's probably the most attack-minded. I think he's the closest thing they've got to a left wing back in terms of his sort of balance of his play. It's something to think about, and I'm sure it's something McKenna is thinking about at this moment in time. But that was the one thing that I found strange from last weekend, was not having a fullback on the bench. We'd seen Thompson tire badly against Cheltenham. And maybe it was just a case of, Kieran was asked after the game, where was James Norwood? And he was like, well, not all the strikers can get on the bench. A few days later, all the strikers got on the bench. We had 4 forward options on there. And was that just sort of trying to keep everybody happy? And in the end, that backfired a little bit, because actually you needed a little bit more balance on that bench. You're going to have to upset some people because of those forward options. And it's a tricky line to tread. But I'd be surprised if that was the case again at the weekend. Whoever starts at left back, I think there needs to be at least a bench option for them.
Yep, guaranteed. I think so. Kane is a good option to have, because he can play both sides, can't he? He can cover both of those positions. So even if we're just talking about Thompson starting the game, but Kane Vincent Young at least being on that bench, he could, because if Wes Burns goes down after 15 minutes and Town lose him, that's a real.
Well, we had that discussion, didn't we? I think there was a moment where, I think he took a knock, and we said if Wes Burns has to go off, which is not impossible because he's had some injuries along the way this season, who replaces him? You're looking at probably a bit of a reshuffle, aren't you? I mean, Janoy Donatian can obviously move further forward, but then you're having to bring on, I guess then Burgess comes on and plays in defence. That's probably the next thing that you're looking to do.
Kyle Edwards is a bit of a miss here, isn't he? Because we know he's out for month or so, several weeks anyway. And McKenna, when discussing that injury, was talking about how Kyle Edwards had been, where they were working on him to play the right wing role.
Left wing back.
No, right.
Right, okay, on the right.
Yeah, as a potential foil for Burns. Clearly, we know he can play on the left, but they were working on him on the right as well. So he's a bit of a miss there. But you have to have someone on the bench to cover for those wide areas, because it's that's the width to this team. Is those two positions. This isn't a 4-4-2 where you can get width from a fullback, an overlapping fullback, and a winger. It's a 3-4-3. This is where the real width is coming from, especially if you're playing with Chaplin and Selina, who are kind of inside attackers, aren't they? Inside forwards.
Tactically, that interests me this weekend. I was having a look. Fleetwood played a sort of 4-1-4-1 system in midweek against Wigan. If Ipswich are having problems with the wing backs, just starting to fatigue after playing a lot of games, you're suddenly talking 1v2 down the flanks, and that could become a problem area. And we haven't seen McKenna switch things up majorly. There's been tactical tweaks in terms of how the front three line up, but we've not seen, as good as the back three and goalkeeper have played. There's been no reason to change that. But, will there come a stage? That would be really interesting if there comes a stage where he needs to switch, be it in game, to something drastically different in terms of shape. We'll have to see.
Yep. It's going to be a really interesting one this weekend, isn't it? So the subplots of going into games with subplots is great. You've obviously got the subplot of the attackers. You've got Nsiala, you've got Harrison, you've got the overarching themes of our town going to make the playoffs. We've asked and tried to answer quite a lot of kind of questions from each other ahead of this game, haven't we?
A couple of Ipswich players going back to Fleetwood as well. Donasian's been up there before. Wes Burns has spoken really well about owing Fleetwood a lot as a football club whose career was really starting to drift. He was getting sent out on loan here, there and everywhere at Bristol City. And Fleetwood were the team that showed faith in him and gave him that 3-year contract. So, yeah, subplots, that's what we like in this business, isn't it? So, and Fleetwood, of course, fighting for their lives at the bottom end of the table. That shouldn't be forgotten either. So, a fascinating game in store, which leads us, after this lengthy chat, to prediction time. Then it's a game Ipswich realistically need to win. Are they going to do a win?
Well, on my little sheet here, when I was answering your questions for all of these games, I've put a D next to it. I've put a draw next to it, so I'm going to have to stick with that. But I think there might be some goals in this one. We've been used to more tighter contests with McKenna here, but I think Ipswich are going to score twice. I think Fleetwood might score twice as well. I'm going to go for a Desmond. I'll go for a Desmond. Yeah, Desmond 2-2.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm the same as you. Looking at some of Fleetwood's results, I mentioned the 3-3 draws that they've had. I think Ipswich are going to really try and sort of end this mini goal droughish period by going for it. 2-1 Ipswich. I've got squeak through. I don't think it will be. I think there'll be nervy moments throughout this game where we're not sure if it will get done, but they'll get it done, and then that will set up the big crowd against Lincoln nicely. Hopefully they can get a win and get the ball rolling again.
Mate, I'm going to take this little piece of paper, which is where I've done my wins and my losses from what we've just done, and I'm going to put it on. I've got a whiteboard, it's like a clear glass kind of board in front of me. I'm going to put it up here and keep a little track of that, because if it's not beyond, of course, it's not beyond Ipswich to win at Fleetwood this weekend, and if they do, that puts them ahead of schedule on my my little run-in that I've done.
Now,
here.
Obviously, Kieran McKenna and everyone at the club will tell you that they don't look at league tables and they don't have these conversations that we've had. Wes Burns has rather let that ruse slip, because he's in his interview this week, he said that when the boss first arrived, we sat down and we spoke about how 2 points a game would get us where we want to be, and as a group we've sat down this week and said that we're still on track for that, and they've worked out, they've had that exact same conversation that we've had. They've worked out what they need, so next time they try and tell us that they're not looking at the league table and it's one at a time,
good
I'm
times.
not buying it, but Brent, I look forward to sharing a car with you for many hours over the weekend, and we'll see everybody on the other side.
You're not going to do you're not going to do any of the furniture for the outro. You're not going to do it.
What? Manscaped.
Yep.
KOA at checkout. Get some kind of discount.
Yep.
You know the drill on that one. And leave us some likes and reviews, because that's important for algorithms and that, apparently.
Yep.
I think that's it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's it. Well done.
Thanks, mate.
See you next time.